Welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm Gary Hopper, and my co-host and guest are not here yet because parking is brutal. Ended up having to get what came dangerously close to exercise just to get here. I parked up near the library. Anyway, we'll wait for them, but in the meantime, talk about what is going on, what's happening. So the hurricane wasn't as big a deal as people thought it was going to be, unless you were on some of the islands out in the Bahamas. Um, but that's a good thing. Caribbean, whatever those places are. And so, what else is happening? We have Ed Nail coming on on as a guest tonight. If and when he gets here, if he can ever find a place to park. He's from Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers, and Ed and I went way back. Ed back around 2004, 3 or 4. We had a police chief in Ware who was out of their mind, and nobody wanted to do anything about it. He was good at making friends with the people he had to, so he was friends with the selectmen, and to heck with anybody else. And so he did some things. I had people coming to me as a state legislator saying, you got to do something about this guy, but it really wasn't my call. It's really a local issue. And as a legislator, I'm primarily focused on what's going on in the state. And so I kind of let it slide until something happened to and I saw the chief in action. And it was pretty horrific, pretty arrogant, a total abuse of power. And so my wife and I created a ballot initiative. The only way to get rid of the guy was to change all the selectmen and fire him, which could cost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal consequences to the town. But the other less typical way to deal with it was to have his position become an elected one. And because it became an elected one by the governing body, which is the citizens, you're not really firing him, so therefore you don't really have to pay him off as much. I'm sure the selectmen paid him off anyway, but whatever. So Ed Nail and I and my wife and a bunch of people from Ware got a petitioned warrant article to have his position become an elected one. And it worked really great. And it was really something I harp on a lot on the show is accountability. The only reason police officers abuse power is because they're not accountable. If people are accountable, there's less abuse. Same thing with the priesthood. It wasn't the priest being sick and twisted that was the real problem. The real problem was they weren't held accountable, so those abuses went, unchecked, and probably there was more people being abused because there was no consequences. It's the same in the judiciary. If you have a judiciary that has no check or balance, then there's going to be judges who abuse that position because they can. And we had a chief that was out of control, so we had the petition warrant article, and it went to, we're an SB2 town, which means we get together before the actual election or when we vote, and we have a deliberative session. At the deliberative session, we discussed the different warrant articles, and there was a move to try to basically gut the warrant article we had to have the police chief's position in town be an elected position. And it was during that debate back and forth that the police chief at the time held up a stack of papers. And if you, this is according to Ed Nail told me, I didn't know at the time because I wasn't familiar with them. When you do a background check, they don't come through on an 8 by 11.5-inch paper. They come by on 8 by 14-inch papers, the elongated legal forms. And so the chief held up a stack of those background check forms and said that if you, and this is at the podium, he gets up and says, if you check the records of the people that signed this petition warrant article. They have records as long as my arm, which inferred that he'd done background checks on people that signed that petition warrant article, which is entirely unconstitutional, illegal. I forget what it's suppressing vote or whatever you want to call it, but it's unconstitutional to attack people for voting or applying their civic authority. It was also illegal federally for him to do background checks unless he's investigating somebody for a crime. So on multiple counts, according to his own words, he had done something illegal, and everything else. So myself, I know I did, and I was told 2 other people in town did. I don't know who they are. That's confidential. Went to the Attorney General's office the following Monday after the deliberative session and filed a complaint. And some interesting things happened in the process. In the process, it turned out the person who was videotaping the deliberative session, who was a friend of the chief, said he forgot to turn the tape on, so there was no video record of it. The reporter for the union leader, who was sitting in the room at the time, failed to report on it. And so there was many witnesses to this, and there was still a transcript from the deliberative session that I made available to the Attorney General's office because they said they had no evidence. So I made that transcript available to them. And what they did basically is they never investigated. They never did anything. After repeated phone calls to the Attorney General's office, they just kept saying, well, we're looking into it and things, and they never did anything. Because the evidence was pretty profound, and they just didn't do anything. So if the Attorney General's, which is supposed to be basically the oversight of the police departments, doesn't do anything when a police chief clearly violates people's civil liberties and clearly violates federal law, what does another police chief in another town believe he can get away with? Obviously, if he's on the edge of thinking of doing something like checking background checks on people that have not done anything or allegedly done anything wrong, he feels empowered to do it because there are no consequences. So that's what happened with the Attorney General at that time. Another thing I did with Ed Nail was I forget, I think it was around 2005. I was out of office then because we were lumped in with Goffstown, and Goffstown outnumbers Ware like 2-1. The first election I got reelected in 2002, but 2004 I lost by like 7 votes to Russ Day. He was a really nice guy, but he won. Anyway, in that election cycle was when the Judge David Souter, United States Supreme Court Justice David Souter, and the Supreme Court, the other 4 members of the Supreme Court, passed down a decision on the Kelo, the city of New London, Connecticut versus Suzette Kelo from New London, Connecticut. The case was Pfizer Corporation had moved into town, and they wanted basically more, higher end places for their executives to live in New London, Connecticut. So the city of New London handed over the power of eminent domain to a group of people associated with the city government, but separate and not accountable to them. And they started basically taking all these properties along the Thames River in New London, Connecticut. And Suzette Kelo, who had lived there, I think it was second generation, I'm not really sure, it's been a while. But anyway, she had lived there a long time. It was a middle-class home. There was really nothing wrong with the homes in that area. They decided that they were going to take all these homes, and Suzette Kelo fought it. And this, for me, was a really good. Well, at first, when I heard it, it was on a Thursday. I just said, "That's nuts," and I was actually on Friday talking about it with my wife. Says, "This is insane." And Ed Nail calls me on the phone and said, "Hey Gary, what do you think about a petition warrant article to have his house turned into a veterans memorial?" And I said, "Ed, that's beautiful." And I did that for two reasons. One, it gave me time to read the decision and to make sure that I wasn't all wet, because it seemed obvious that that was wrong, but that's not necessary. Just because something seems obvious at the time, that doesn't mean there aren't other variables that you didn't consider. So anyway, I started researching it in the next few days, and what it was is eminent domain, when the Constitution was written, was John Adams referred to as a tyrannical power. In today, it would be referred to as a necessary evil. In other words, it's something that government has the right to do, but it's only for very limited circumstances does the federal or state government or local government have the right to take people's property. And those limited reasons are things like for infrastructure. Like if you look at where New Hampshire, a huge swath of land was taken after I forget which flood, the 38 or something flood. A huge chunk of land was taken to build the Everett Dam, so that they could build a dam to keep water from flowing downstream in the event of a lot of rain, because that flood that happened killed a lot of people downstream or wiped them out or whatever. And so they built the Everett Dam. When they built the Everett Dam, they had to take people's property because it was going to be in a floodplain. Things like that. That's what eminent domain is intended for. It's intended for things like Northern Pass is actually a reasonable reason for the use of eminent domain, because it's infrastructure, or building a highway or a school. Things like that is what it was intended for. The federal government actually, when they originally used it, I forget how many acres, but they could only take a limited amount of acres, and it was strictly for the use of building like a seaport for the Navy or an Army base or things like that. They weren't allowed to just take land willy-nilly and such. That morphed over time because Supreme Court looks at the original intention, or is supposed to look at the original intention of eminent domain, and then look at decisions that have happened since to determine the rationale for the use of eminent domain. And over time, it kind of morphed. And it really morphed during the building of the railroads. The railroads were a private company, but the federal government allowed them to use eminent domain to take property as they were building out west. And it is reasonable to believe that if they didn't have that power, we never would have become as industrialized as we did so quickly, because it was the railroads that helped make that happen. So you can look at that and say, okay, that makes sense, because it was a private business doing it, but it was in effect for infrastructure. Then later on, I forget what year it was, in Washington, D.C., they had an area of the city that was so blighted. There was open sewerage, there was rats, it was functionally uninhabitable. And I don't know if anybody tried to buy the land, but whatever the case was, the government came in and took the land and cleared it out because it was not safe for human habitation, and they rebuilt it. So a blighted area was one of the reasons and that was, I guess, contested, went to the Supreme Court, and that was okay to take that land. And on a side note, I found it really interesting was that in the late 1800s, the United States Supreme Court said that taking the land in a decision late 1800s, land of Mormons who practiced polygamy because it was immoral. So taking their land, according to the United States Supreme Court, through eminent domain was also legal because what they were practicing, the religious practices they had were functionally immoral, which that's just a side note. I just thought that was kind of scary and interesting. Anyway, so we go to blighted. So then it goes to the Supreme Court. Suzette Kilo's house is being taken, and they decide, in that decision, they go one step further. They say, well, yes, the property isn't blighted, but the city believes that they can make more money through construction and building new homes and new condos, so therefore it's okay to take her land. Which, after I read the decision, I says, how is that even close to being reasonable? Well, it is reasonable when you start looking at some of the, a lot of the people that are in positions like judges have a lot of investments. They have a lot of money, and they know how much, there's a lot of money to be made in real estate. In fact, I believe, I was told, I don't never double checked it, that's how Judge Souter made his money, was in real estate investments. Well, if you're a real estate investor, being able to take people's property that are, in choice places is really cool. I mean, you can picture any place in Manchester that's got a great lake or a lake around in the middle or something like that. If you had all the right connections with the alderman and the mayor, they could just hand over eminent domain to somebody and just take all those properties around the lake and build a nice golf course, condos for their friends. It's an insane abuse of power that the Supreme Court had handed down to the city of New London, Connecticut. It was almost bizarre. And at any rate, so that's kind of a little bit of the history of the eminent domain. So when Ed Nail called me on that Friday when I was talking to my wife, do you want to do this? I says, wow, that's awesome. And so the next week he had a petition warrant article, and I went down to the town dump and started having people sign it, And it's amazing how many people, when they don't actually have any skin in the game, will sign something and say, yeah. But when it comes down to actually doing something, they're kind of busy, watching sports or something. Anyway, so I got enough signatures for that. But in the interim, a guy from California who I really think is a brick shy of a full load, he called the town hall and said, we want to build the Lost Liberty Hotel, and we ask you to take Judge Souter's property and where, so we can build the Lost Liberty Hotel. And that got all the press. And that kind of took over. I was trying to make sure, because what the media does, if you follow politics, is they make it about the politician. They don't talk about ideas. They talk about this guy, like this is why this narrative all over the news that everybody that disagrees with the left is a racist or a homophobe or whatever. That's why they do that, because they can label the person and they don't have to discuss the issue. And that's what I was afraid that they would do when we were trying to take Souter's house. They would make it all about, Judge Souter being a nice old gentleman, and the people that are trying to take it are, mean-spirited or whatever crap they would come up with. And that's what they ended up doing. They made it all about this guy from California who was a little bit nuts. And when it came to the deliberative session, we had about 6 months. We did door to door. We went around town trying to get petitions and stuff like that. When it came to the deliberative session, people got up to the podium and talked about poor little Judge Souter. I went to school with him and all this other stuff. And this guy from California, he shot. I didn't admit this at the time because it was just kind of embarrassing, But the guy from California showed up in disguise, talking to people, and trying to keep a low profile, because by that time I think he kind of understood that the media had made it all about him and nothing about eminent domain and its abuses. And so we lost at the deliberative session. But it was a really cool thing. Ed Nail helped me with that too. Ed was instrumental in getting that done. And I think if Ed and I had been able to keep control of it, it could have turned out quite differently. But it is what it is. And but the really cool thing about it is because it was at the deliberative session, that wasn't until February of the following year. The decision, I think, was in the spring or early summer, and the deliberative session didn't happen, so it kept it in the news. And by keeping it in the news, it kept the New Hampshire legislature on their toes. See, New Hampshire, the state Supreme Court, had always deferred to the federal government in regards to eminent domain. So the standards that the federal government set is what the court in New Hampshire set for the citizens of New Hampshire, and the federal court had always been pretty good. But the Kelo decision, to give you an example of how bad it was, is once that decision was passed, there was more land in the United States trying to be taken via eminent domain following the Kelo decision than was lost in Katrina. It was a huge land grab, because if you had the right connections, you could take anybody's property. So that's basically what it amounted to, and it was insane. But anyway, the positive side, because we worked at it and we kept it in the press, we ended up in New Hampshire. If you look at your state constitution, there was an amendment to it that made it one of the most difficult states in the union to take people's property for eminent domain. So in the long run, it really did, all that effort did help the citizens of New Hampshire, but it's too bad it didn't help the rest of the country. And you can really blame, if you want to blame people, you can blame your Congress. Congress has the right to override a Supreme Court decision if they get there. If they some of them are probably making so much money off it too that why would they? But if they were really doing what the people sent them up there to do, they would have done something to overcome that. But that's some of the stuff Ed and I have gotten involved in. Ed's obviously still not here, but he's the chair of now I'm going to forget, what is it? Coalition New Hampshire Taxpayers. And their organization, I used to be on his radio show. He had a radio show down in Amherst, or I'm not sure, maybe Milford. I think it was Amherst, or Hollis maybe. Anyway, I used to be on his radio show, and the Coalition New Hampshire Taxpayers then was all about educating people about taxes. They helped work with people who wanted to become members of, they still do, town or city budget committees and things like that to understand, how to start lowering taxes and things like that. And that's what their primary focus has been. But in 2000, Ed was involved in an election in Deering. And he noticed, I might have the numbers wrong, but roughly 16 people showed up to vote from an address, and I'm going to forget what the name, Deer something Road. And so they show up and they vote. Well, upon further investigation, there is no road in Deering with that name. The address was totally fictitious, and the people voted there. Ed published the names of them, and they said, well, we were bussed in to do that. And so that's when, I think that's when Ed started realizing how abused the system is. And it's, again, a situation of accountability. So Ed tracked all that information down, turned it over to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General didn't do anything. So if you have people, 16 people coming in and voting illegally in Deering, putting down an address that they don't live at, and that an address that doesn't exist, and that isn't enough evidence for the Attorney General and the Secretary of State to pursue and do something, what is? So that means, after that, if you were somebody who was engaging in voter fraud, you'd say, well, I guess it doesn't matter what we do. They're not going to prosecute us anyway. And that's what's happened. There's no accountability, so the abuses happen. So what else am I going to talk about? I'm going to wait for Ed to talk about that because he's the one who's done all the research. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit tonight to make sure I covered it. And I kind of touched on that a little bit. There was a newscaster for ESPN who claimed that Trump is a racist and all this stuff. And just so you know, if you're watching any of the stuff that's going on in Florida or Houston, Texas, nobody cares. The vast majority of Americans really don't care what color you are. They don't care what color I am. If you're in need, people are helping you. People are helping all kinds of different people of different color. Most of the alleged racism is by the left to try to discredit the right, and that's all it is. It's really not even true. If you look at, for instance, the Ku Klux Klan, the Ku Klux Klan used to have millions and millions of members. I forget how many millions it was in the 50s or 30s, but it was like 4 or 8 million, I've forgotten. And now they got like 8,000. Okay, they're almost entirely insignificant. And what's happening is the left is using racism to try to, I think, sell papers or sell newscasts or just to label anybody that disagrees with them. Because if you disagree with somebody and you call them a racist, then you don't have to, talk about any actual substantive issues because you've already labeled them as a racist. So therefore, anything they have to say is irrelevant. And the problem is they're not using their logic on themselves. In other words, they'll say that somebody like, they'll tear down a statue. Who would they? They vandalized some weird statue. I think the guy who wrote the national anthem today, and Scott Keith, whatever his name was, they vandalized that one. Francis Scott Keith. I don't know why they vandalized
K-E-Y.
K-E-Y. I don't have any idea why they vandalized his statue. I know that the morons actually vandalized in New Orleans. They vandalized. Oh gosh. Hey, what's the girl that started the fight in France? The general. She was a general down there, in France. I just lost that too. Anyway, her statue. She was the one who was burnt at the stake by the English, and for some reason they trashed her statue in New Orleans. But the problem is, if you're going to hold people accountable to today's standards from an era that was hundreds of years ago or 150 years ago, there's really nobody that could stand up to that scrutiny. In fact, the group that can stand up to that scrutiny the least is the Democratic Party. If you were to burn anything down or discredit anything, it would be the Democratic Party, because they were the party of slavery. They were the party who started the Ku Klux Klan and the Jim Crow laws and all that. So if you're going to burn something down or tear something down because of its racial heritage, the Democratic Party would be the place to go.
Are you talking about Joan of Arc?
Joan of Arc, yeah. Joan of Arc, they trashed a Joan of Arc statue in New Orleans, which is just ignorant. Yeah, so if you're going to go about destroying institutions because of their racial history, the Democratic Party is the one you should really be going after. The Republican Party is obviously the party of Lincoln. So if we're going to go down that road, at least be consistent, you know. But it's all BS. It was really actually awesome. I was up in Acadia National Park, and there was a local article about the Ku Klux Klan in that area. And I forget what year it was, but they tried to start a Ku Klux Klan group in that area in Maine. And it was probably like 100 years ago or 50 years ago, something, I don't know. And it was actually quite interesting because the article goes on to say that they started having their meetings, and they realized that one of the things they kind of had to do was to hate Jewish people. And said, okay, well, there's only one Jewish person in the area, and everybody really liked them. Okay, so that was kind of out the window. So okay, well, let's scrap that part of it. Then the other thing they were supposed to do is hate black people, and there weren't any, so that was kind of pointless. And the other thing they were supposed to hate is Catholics. Well, in that area, there's a lot of French Catholics that came down. So like half the population is French Catholic, and they're all their friends. So the Ku Klux Klan, although it tried to start and they started having meetings, quickly realized that they really had nothing to meet for, because nobody really wanted to hate everybody else, you know. Excuse me. But I thought that was pretty darn interesting, you know, because the whole idea is just so dumb. Because functionally, if you're created by God, then who's to say who is better or worse? You know, that's up to God. That's God's choice to decide. You know, who is better or worse, not us. So I think that's. And what bothers me is the thing that really bothers me about the Ku Klux Klan is that they claim to be Christian. And I've read the Bible enough to know that there is no support for that in the Bible. The Bible says to love your neighbor as yourself. And who's my neighbor? Basically, everybody's my neighbor. It says you're supposed to pray for your enemies. It's supposed to love your enemies, because he uses the example that even an evil person loves their kids. That's easy. You know, it's if you can love people that persecute you is what makes you a Christian. It's the ability to love everybody regardless of whatever circumstances they may have grown up in or not grown up in is what Christianity is all about. So a group of people who hate people for the sake of hating them is not a Christian group. There's nothing Christian about it. I mean, they might call themselves that, but that's about it. There's no practical justification for that as far as the Bible goes. At least I've never found any. So I just wanted to throw that out there because that does bother me. What else happened today? Oh, news. In 2016, right after the election, there was a Muslim girl who said some people yelling Trump, Trump, tried to rip her hijab off her and torment her and were attacking her because she was Muslim. That was basically the headline on BuzzFeed just last December. Well, the headline that you probably won't see much of today, or actually a couple days ago, was that woman has been convicted of falsifying making false claims because it never happened. You know, so be careful when you see news articles that are about racism. Like there's that little kid that was supposedly hung by some older kids. Didn't kill him, fortunately, because he's biracial up in Claremont. Be careful how you look at that, because I don't know what the circumstances are yet. Just give it time. Don't jump on the bandwagon and want to burn down a town because some 14 or whatever year olds are out of their cotton picking minds, which a lot of 14-year-olds are. So I don't know. I'm reserving judgment. I think it's really the wise thing to do today when you see news reports is to reserve judgment. Just hold off. Don't assume. It's like the whole, we had almost a whole town burnt down or because of stand up, don't shoot. When that cop shot that kid in Missouri, it was never true. That never happened. He never turned around to the cop, rose his hands and said, "Don't shoot." It never happened. The kid attacked the cop, started going away, and the cop said, don't move." And the kid turned around and started charging at him again like he was going to attack him again. So the cop shot in self-defense. But that's not what the narrative was, and that's not what the papers were. Everything was stand up, hands up, don't shoot. And you ended up with riots and everything else in that town, burning down businesses and everything else over something that never happened. You had the same situation in Florida with a guy who was tackled by a young punk, and he shot the kid, and the kid died. And first of all, they claimed he was a white guy that shot the black kid, and that wasn't true. The guy was Hispanic, and they just blew that out of the water. In fact, one of the reporters at the beginning of that news cycle changed the words of the guy when he was in contact with the local police. Local police asked him specifically, is he a Caucasian? Is he black? And they edited out that part where the police were asking him kind of to try to describe the kid so that it sounds like he's a black kid, and then the guy shot him. They did that. The guy did that deliberately to make it a racial thing when it never was. It's constant. It's I personally blame the media because they're looking for. They seem to be. I don't know if they're deliberately trying to incite racism or try to bring it to the surface or whatever, or if this is just a great way to sell papers, because a lot of this garbage is really not true. Like if you look at Chicago, they claim that it's the cops that are out of control, but you have the mayor's black. I believe a lot of the police are. People in charge are all blacks. They're all Democrats, and it's the same in Detroit. And yet they claim it's there's violence against blacks when it's entirely out of proportion. I know personally, growing up, that if you're a teenager, there might be, if you're going to say that there's any real profiling by police, there is, and it's against teenagers because they know a police officer, if there's a crime in an area and they get a report of something and they're driving down the street and they see a 90-year-old woman in a walker, I don't care what color she is, that's pretty irrelevant, and they see a group of 16-year-old boys, guess who they're going to question? It doesn't matter what color they are. It matters that they're teenagers, and the probability of a crime being committed in that area, the likelihood is that it's probably the teenagers, and the lady with the walker is probably safe. Or at least she can't get away that quick, so you don't have to question her right away. So it's I know, like, for instance, one night I was when I was a teenager, I was walking along, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I had a T-shirt on, and I'm trying to remember what town I was in. I guess it doesn't really matter. I was just walking along, walking home. I used to do a lot of walking, and cop pulled up and said, "Hey, we need you for a question." I said, "Why? What's going on?" He says, "Well, a woman just had her car broken into by a young guy. Would you mind coming with us so she can see if it's you?" I don't care, right? So I got in the cruiser, no trouble, because I knew it wasn't me, so I didn't care. And I went there, and I ended up getting a ride at least to the town line, so that saved me some walking. But the fact that they questioned me was just logical, because I fit the age and of the person that had committed the crime. So it's just logical. If cops are going to absolutely positively never profile, they really can't do their job, because they have to be able to quickly discern what is the greatest likelihood that the crime was committed and who is most likely to have done it in any given area or circumstance. If they don't, they really are not very good at their job. So anyway, what else happened? Oh yeah, the reporter for ESPN calling the president racist and everything else. That's wonderful. I don't know. I was told that the ratings on sports and ESPN is going down and down and down. I think because their reporters who are supposed to be reporting, sports, are getting so political. People just don't want to hear it anymore. They had some music awards the other day, and that viewership from that was about half of what it used to be. And it's because people are sick of it. If you want to know the truth, watching the news isn't going to help you, because the news is just so much full of garbage. Every night it's some other racist thing or something's going on, and it's really not true. They're filling you. I was actually watching an interesting video a little while ago, and it claimed that human nature is to look for danger. As you're walking, it's a good example is if you're walking in the woods. Even if you're walking in the woods alone, it would be pretty abnormal not to look around once in a while to make sure there is nothing that is endangering you in that given area. And because we're kind of pre-programmed for survival, that's a natural characteristic of it's part of human nature to look for danger. And the problem we have is in today's society is we turn on the news, and the news, Channel 6 or 7, whatever channel, or Fox, CNN, it doesn't matter which one, they want you to tune in at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, because that's how they make their money. So they sensationalize something, or they claim something happened, and they blow it out of the water as far as how relevant it is, and because they want ratings. But what that does to the viewer is they look at events going on of what look like racism or things like that, and they get a entirely distorted view of the actual reality around them. In fact, if you look at the federal crime statistics, the likelihood that you're going to get shot in the United States of America is actually down. I forget by what number, but it's huge in the last 20 years. The crime rate has actually gone down a lot. But if you're watching the news all the time, you're going to constantly be reinforced the sense that your life is in peril. And act accordingly. You're going to always kind of want to stay home and not go out and do things because you're kind of concerned that something might happen. And I think because of that, people have an absolutely distorted view of the actual danger that is threatening them in real life, and it's not healthy. If you really want to get more peace of mind, one thing you can do is shut the news off. Shut this off. I don't care. There's probably only a couple of people in Malaysia watching anyway. So So try to keep that as a frame of reference. You know, when you're if you do watch the news, just get enough of it to get an idea of what's going on, then shut it off, because most of it's just BS. You know, like the shooting up at Dartmouth. They said, you know, we're much more well prepared for a shooting like this, and they were patting themselves on the back on how well they reacted to a shooting situation at the hospital, and I'm sure they did well. But the fact of the matter is that likelihood of that happening is so remote. It's not something that people ever should really be concerned about when they go into a hospital, is the possibility of getting shot. But if you focus on that in your head, you're going to think, you know, people are going around shooting each other in the hospitals all the time, and they're ready, willing, and prepared to deal with it. It's just not true. It doesn't really. I don't know when the last time somebody got shot in a hospital is, but I bet you it was a long time ago.
Roland's on the air, pal.
Who?
A guy named Roland.
All right. Hello, Roland. You're on the air. Hello.
Hello?
Hi. You're on the air, buddy.
Okay. A couple of years ago, Republican representative, Mr. Valancourt.
Valancourt.
Remember him?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you did. I don't know why you said that. But anyway, he came out with an interesting program. I saw him on TV. He had a chart, and he had all the representative people you got 300 people there, I guess. And he showed the ones that hardly ever showed up. And I thought that was very, very interesting to see, you know, who really represents people. In other words, who just wants to be a name in Concord. So anyway, I was hoping that maybe somebody else could take his place someday and make a chart of all the people that never hardly attends. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Roland. Steve was an interesting guy. Sorry. Steve was an interesting guy, and he did that. He was. I remember sitting in the break room at the State House, and he was debating on not running. I forget what year it was, a few years ago. And I said, Steve, as much as I disagree with you, probably a lot, I says, you're a necessary thorn in the side of leadership. I really hope that you run again. And he is, because he would attack anybody. He would point out, and Roland, just like you were saying, he would come out and tell everybody who really wasn't even showing up. And there's a lot of people who don't. And part of that is because of the nature of the beast. You're getting paid $100 a year for, depending on your committee, but that really doesn't depend that much, but for a lot of work and a lot of headaches, you know. I have people that hate me because of how I voted on things. Personally, I don't care. I mean, it'd be nice if everybody loved me, but whatever. I'm not that sensitive, so I don't really care. But that's a lot of abuse to put up with for $100 a year. So there's that threw me off. Thanks, Paul. He's laughing. He put up a sign up on the screen that says, I love you. Anyway, so the work entailed in being a legislator is quite a bit. And it's $100 a year. So there's a lot of people who sign up and don't really realize how much work it entails, and they don't show up. There are other people that are asked to sign up, and this goes on for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. If you look at a ballot, let's say in Ware, okay? If 3 Republicans sign up for 3 seats in Ware, and only one person signs up to run against them as a Democrat, the Democratic Party will go out of their way to find people to fill those 2 seats before there's a deadline. And it's the same thing with the Democrats do that, the Republicans do it. If there's nobody to fill that void, those empty seats, they'll find somebody. And the people they find aren't necessarily people who want to do it. They're people who said, okay, I don't care. If you need to put my name down, put my name down. Then they don't even run for office. They don't put up signs or anything else. But because of the nature of the beast, if they're a Democrat in a Democratic district and only 4 people signed up and they needed 6, there's 2 of those people who might not really want to be state legislators, but they're on the ballot anyway. And if it's a heavily Democratic district, they tend to win. And they can win again and again. And so that's kind of what happens. You have people that really didn't want to run for office, that the Democratic Party or the Republican Party talked them into it. There are other people who, like you say, probably run just because they want the license plates and then they don't show up. That happens also. So it's a mixed bag. But it is what it is, and I'm glad. I don't know who's going to do that. I know Steve published those numbers every couple of years of who ran and didn't show up. You can actually find a lot of that stuff on the state website. You can go and look at your. If you go to it's the state the House of Representatives is not called that. It's called the New Hampshire General Court. And if you do a Google search for New Hampshire General Court and you go to the House, the web page will come out and you can go to the House or Senate, go to the House, and then you can say, who's my legislator? And you scroll down to whatever district you're in, click on that, and it'll give you a list of the legislators that represent you, and you can do it yourself. You can go on there and look at their voting record. And if you find that there's a bunch of key votes that one legislator voted on and the other one wasn't there, that'll give you an idea of who you shouldn't be supporting in the next election. But to me, a Democrat who doesn't show up is a lot better than a Democrat who does show up. But that's my take on it. And we'll see. I guess my guests aren't showing up, so they probably couldn't find a place to park. It's pretty nuts out there. So you guys have a nice week, and I'll see you next week with more than me, hopefully. Bye.